so grateful for the messages that have already been shared today and for the authenticity that I have already felt from both speakers. I love them both, and I love their vulnerability, and I love their honesty. And I love that when people show up in an authentic space, then we are inspired to be authentic in our own spaces. And I think that's what the power of authenticity is. I think it's also one of those buzzwords right now. Vulnerability and authenticity feels like a cool thing to talk about. It doesn't always feel like a cool thing to be. And so I love when we show examples of it and we give permission by the way we show up. And I appreciate that Leslie reflected back to me a moment where we connected and she felt called to be who she's being called to be based on maybe something I showed up and shared. And I think that's the power of our connection with each other as what I believe are as literal brothers and sisters with each other. And so today I'm grateful for a few minutes to really break apart the idea of authenticity and maybe give a frame for which you can check yourself and see where that principle is showing up in your life or where you need to show up more authentically. And I think it's important to note that when we become more self-aware, when we attend events like this, it helps us have language to put on maybe feelings we're having. We often don't know we're not showing up the way we value until we get signals that we're not showing up the way we value. For example, I've had a really busy 6 weeks. I'm just going to be honest. I have written 3 books and I have 5 in process, and I've had probably 35 speaking events. And up until 2 weeks ago, I was hosting or producing 3 shows. Now I'm down to 2. Real Talk and The Middle are 2 different shows I do. And I've been functioning on a more depleted level. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit about self-love, but I can only do that for certain seasons. And then I know it's not how I value showing up. And so as we talk about authenticity, what's the signal for you that maybe you're not showing up authentically? For me, it often is that I'm hustling or I'm in comparisons. I'm looking around my neighborhood and deciding that I need to do something based on someone else's choices. And I think that that's, for me, one of the ways in which I know I'm not showing up authentically. The other way for me is that if it is too much about perfection, then I'm not making room for the humanness. And I love that both presenters, and even in Leslie's introductions and kind of hosting this event, that the authenticity that shows up is really where as humans we want people to show up. That's the stuff we get excited about. I just watched a documentary about a very, very popular pop rock singer. And it's a behind the scenes of her tour. And she is really authentic. And I really appreciated seeing how she is uniquely showing up and trying to be a mom and trying to go on tour, and how she lets everyone in her organization and band show up authentically. And I realized if it had been a perfectly scripted documentary where there was no mistakes and no flaws and no honesty about how she felt mom guilt, then it wouldn't have been worth for me watching. So that's why I asked for people to share a name of someone or a person that they have decided is that authentic person in their life. Because think about why you connect with them. Why does your heart resonate with this authentic person? What is it about them that makes you feel like, gosh, I just want to keep talking to them and I want to hear more from them? Because when they show up, it's not every box checked. It's not perfectly maybe scripted. It's not that they have everything figured out in their lives, but they're willing to show you who they are. Brene Brown has really, I think, catapulted language around shame and vulnerability and authenticity. And this is what she says about authenticity. To be authentic, we must cultivate the courage to be imperfect. And I think if we really reflect on the foundation of why Get Real was created, it was that need that was being seen for the lack of permission to be imperfect in our lives. And so Get Real really came from this idea. Brene goes on to say, and vulnerable. So we have to have the courage to be imperfect, but we also have to have the courage, as we've heard from the previous speakers today, to share a little bit of our vulnerability, whether it's the loss of a mother-in-law or a struggle in motherhood. And she goes on to say, we have to believe that we are fundamentally worthy of love and acceptance, just as we are. I've learned that there's no better way to invite more grace and gratitude and joy into our lives than by mindfully practicing authenticity. And what I love about teaching principles is that principles are like a compass. They are not a place on the map where you finally figure out how to be authentic, finally figure out how to have resiliency, finally figure out how to be more empathetic and show more love, and then you're done. No, they're principles that help guide you. And so usually you know when you're off track on GPS because it shows you a reroute. And I hope today, as Leslie invited you to do, that you will find ways in which your spirit is saying you need to reroute. You need to get back on track here. This is an area of your life you're doing great, but this is another area of your life where you could use more support. I hope you feel some courage and authenticity. I love using scripture story, Bible stories, and other scriptures and as examples for me in my life. And even if you're not Christian and you've joined us today, I hope that the Bible examples that I'm going to share resonate with you because they're sacred books of records of stories of really authentic, real people that have had really hard situations and shown, as we've been taught today already so beautifully, how to be resilient. Those are the best stories in scripture to read, whether it's the Torah, whether it's the Quran, whether it's the Book of Mormon, whether it's the New Testament or Old Testament. They're filled with stories that teach us through example of where someone had to be resilient. Those are the stories, not perfect families that checked all the boxes, perfect marriages that had everything figured out. So one of the stories I really love in the Bible is that of Queen Esther. A lot of times we have an idea of what we think she was like or her life was like, but what we know is she was an orphan. She was raised by a family member. So right there, even if we don't have a full record of her life, we can probably surmise that she had to develop some resiliency skills. And I think we see later on that she pulled from those. Then we often have this idea that she was like the most beautiful girl in the land. And so she won like this pageant and it gave her a spot in the kingdom. And that's not really what some of the Hebrew records say of Queen Esther. They actually say that she was comely and she was not always seen as the most beautiful. And so think about this. She goes in to live into the court and there's already a lot of queens there. And I don't know about you, but you put a whole room full of queens. They don't usually think, gosh, we should get some more. We're missing out on some queens. We need to get a few more women to show up into the court. And so my guess is that she was oftentimes feeling like she wasn't welcomed and she was alone. And what we know of her story is she was called in her authenticity to stand up for her people. She had a different faith. She had a different practice. She had a different background. And if she had shied away from that, trying to fit in with all the other queens in the court, we would have lost this beautiful story where she invites her people to fast and pray, and she saves them in her authenticity. I think about her often. My daughter's middle name is Esther, and my grandmother's name was Esther, and we have a painting of Queen Esther hanging in the hallway right by my daughter's door. And part of the reason why we gave her that name is our love for Queen Esther and my grandma, who was just one of those Southern grandmas that every time she saw me, she would say, give me some sugar, which was code for give me some kisses and hugs. And she was a convert to her faith. And she had some rough things happen in her life where she would feed people during the Depression that would come to the back of her door porch. And she just always had this very giving heart. And I love that she always, when I was with her, she just loved you from a place of, I'm okay with who I am and I'm okay with where you're at. I think Becky really is an example of that as well. That authentic spirit of heart is really the doorway to open up to empathy. But I love that Queen Esther didn't shy away. She didn't try to be like everyone else in the court. I had an opportunity to really study a principle that I'm working on a book about, and it's called stewardships. And if you're not familiar with stewardships, I really think that as we look at Queen Esther and as we look at people that we admire, and I love the people that you've already put in the chats here and how authentic they are, they have a stewardship assignment, and usually it may be a difficult one. One of the stewardship assignments in my life that has really framed the work I do is the suicide of my sister. She died 7 years ago at the age of 40. And in the last 7 years, I've really made mental health and suicide prevention a focus of my messaging, whether it's on shows or on social media or in books I write or when I speak. And what I would say about stewardship assignments is they are not what we own. And really, I believe we don't own anything except we have a heart that we can give away. Everything we have, our children, our relationships, our careers, our homes, our cars, our chronic illness, our job losses, our depression, our anxiety, our stewardship assignments. And since Meg's death, the stewardship assignment I learned so much from is wrestling with that unique grief and trying to really reconcile my own struggle to want to be quote unquote perfect. I'm the oldest in my family. My mother has dealt with mental health issues her whole life. And so I had spent a lot of my life growing up trying to be the perfect one to save the people around me that I loved. And I think when we talk about authenticity, it's really important to understand that there's only one Savior and we are not him. So if we are to show up as Queen Esther in our unique situations, what is it about us that we can share and offer? Is it from a place of a stewardship that maybe we're not so happy about? Some of our stewardships we get excited about. Oh, you got a promotion and we're so excited about that. Oh, your child's going to Harvard. Oh, that's so exciting. And we celebrate that. But we don't always celebrate the stewardship assignments of job loss or chronic illness or depression, or maybe our children making choices we don't agree with. If we can look at our stewardships and see that they're an invitation for us to show up, not in ownership, but in stewardship, then we show up more authentically. I love that Queen Esther probably was not excited that she had lost her parents, but she rose to a stewardship assignment of being queen. And because of that opportunity and invitation, she made an impact. I'm not happy. My life isn't better because Meg is gone, but I've tried to take that stewardship and share her story as an opportunity to share an authentic part of my life and connect with people all over the world. One more example that I think the Bible does a really great job of showing authenticity is the story of David and Goliath. If you know anything about David's life, he was the brother that everyone almost forgot. Like, he was the brother that wasn't at CrossFit every day, training, and he took care of the animals in the field. And when the prophet came to kind of find a new warrior to take down this totally rude bully, the giant Goliath, they kind of didn't even think of David. And I think if we're going to talk about authenticity, it's so crucial to see that how David handled the stewardship assignment. So he has kind of an interview and he's like, sure, yeah, I'll go totally up toe to toe with that big old honking Goliath. And the scriptures, the Bible really tells us how big Goliath was and how the whole army was so scared and discouraged by him. Well, they try to get David to fit in, right? They give him this assignment. He's like, totally, I'm going to go fight him. And they try to give him armor so he looks the part. When we're talking about authenticity, one of the biggest snags and signals that you need to reroute is that you're trying to look a part. One of the gifts that we each have is that we came to earth unique. And if we're trying to look a part, we're maybe missing our call, our stewardship to show up in our authentic space. Like Queen Esther, if she had tried to look like the other queens, she may not have used her faith to save her people. And David was in this moment where it would have been obvious and easy to take their big armor and their big weapons to go against this big giant. And he says no. He's like, no, listen, I'm just kind of the guy with I have some rocks in a bag and I have this little thing that I throw the rocks. And that's how I take care of the lions and the bears that come try to get the animals that I take care of. So, I'm going to just show up in my normal outfit. And maybe today's version of that would be yoga pants, and I'm going to show up and I don't need a PowerPoint presentation. Sometimes when I speak, people say, so do you have a PowerPoint? And I'm always like, no, I'm not the PowerPoint girl. And he tells the people I'm going to be me. He shows up with the 5 rocks in his bag and he takes down that giant with one swing. And Goliath is not impressed. David shows up and he's like, who do you think I am? And are you do you think you're like a dog? He calls him these horrible names. And David in his fear could have said, oh you're right. I need that armor. I need that fancy sword you offered me. I've got to be what a warrior looks like if I'm going to take this scary giant down that is putting me down and mocking me. And he doesn't. He shows up authentically. He uses his 5 rocks. So in closing, I want to invite you to consider what's in your rock bag. What are the people that you shared with in the chat that are authentic? What would you say about them that is their little rock with their little slingshot? What is it in your bag? See, I really believe that what is beautiful about our human family is that we all have unique gifts and talents. I have a neighbor that is so awesome at making jewelry, making cakes, and doing artwork. She does all of that. And I'm not good at those things, but she's so awesome about sharing her gifts with me. And I'm really good at buying the things she makes. That's one of the rocks in my bag, is I like to support people in their talents. So what are some of the rocks in your bags? I would love to consider with you some. Are you really good at conversation? You know, Becky invited us to have honest conversation. Are you really good at feeling feelings and identifying them? Is one of the rocks in your bag that you're super awesome at listening? My husband is a really good listener, and I think it's made him a really good boss because he has that gift. Are you really good at asking questions? I think some of the greatest conversations I have are the people that I notice ask me a question, and they're just good at asking the right question. Are you really good at faith? I love this permission that we have to consider how we choose to stop and show up in love right now. I think in the example of Queen Esther or in David's example, they stopped in a moment where they could have run away. Growth is always a little bit uncomfortable. And if you're feeling authentic in your life and showing up authentically, you probably are feeling uncomfortable at times. I know I have. There's nothing that has happened in the last 7 years that I haven't felt a little uncomfortable most of the time, or a little stretched beyond where I'm comfortable. God is so good at just giving us a little bit of uncomfortableness so that we'll keep growing and changing and learning. And so my invitation is for each of us to stop trying to compare. Stop trying to be like someone down the street or someone on social media. I love social media and I would love to connect with you there. I'm on Twitter and YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and all the places. But if I'm not careful and if I hang out too much there instead of just share my rocks, my offering, then I can go into comparisons. And all of a sudden I'm looking at someone else's post and what their projects are and what they're doing. And I'm losing sight of what my lane is. Brene Brown, to end with her, talks a lot about swimming, and she loves to swim. And I did do some swimming in high school, so I can kind of relate to the early morning trainings. And when you're a swimmer, if you just glance with your eyes for a moment off into the other lane in the pool, you will literally have your body swerve into that direction of where your eyes go. So I think it's a really helpful reminder as we cultivate authenticity that it's, one, going to take courage. 2, it's going to be unique to what you're called to do. What are your stewardships? What has God put in your place right now? Maybe it's not a call to write a book like Leslie's feeling called to do. Maybe you're caring for an aging parent or you have a child that has special needs. Is that your unique contribution in stewardship right now? And then be careful to not go into comparisons. Don't try so hard to hustle and look apart. I'm bored with that. I want to show up with people in the world that are like, I don't apologize, but this is how I am and this is what I like. I think that's what makes the world so beautiful. So I hope that when you are questioning and you're hustling and you're feeling depleted and you're in comparisons, you'll see that that's your GPS rerouting you back to that lane that you're swimming in. Keep your eyes on your lane, because I really believe God is asking each of us to swim and show up in our authentic space because he needs us. He needs us to offer our gifts uniquely. He doesn't need us to all be the same. Thank you, and God bless you for your authenticity, for your realness, for your stewardship assignments and how you show up. And thank you for giving this space so that we could have this conversation of connection today.